riding on a wild horse. He got bronchitis. All right, our theme this summer is there's a new sheriff in town. We're focusing our attention on a portion of the Bible called the minor prophets. So prophets rode onto the scene to see to it that God's people would take steps to make things right with God. This is an actual quote from the 1874 locust plague. He says, they ate every blade of grass, the wool off sheep, the harnesses off horses, the paint off wagons, and the handles off of pitchforks. In fact, they ate everything but the mortgage. When we look at Joel's description of this locust swarm coming, the one thing Joel doesn't tell us is why. Sometimes in Scripture, the Bible talks about plagues. God brought plagues upon Egypt. Sometimes God allows things in our life to bring us back to Him. How many can say you've seen something in your life? There's just no reason for it. Why did this happen? Why did we find ourselves here? That's where Joel is with the locust swarm. There's no reason given for it. It happens. What you're going to do. Joel chapter 2 gives us the encouragement that Joel spoke to God's people in that era. And I believe it's very important for us today. Joel 2, starting at verse 12, it says, "Even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning." In verse 13, here's our key phrase, "Rend your heart and not your garments." Here's what I'm going to preach to you today. In turning to God, Joel gives us 2 pointers. Number 1, a broken heart is good. And number 2, ripping your clothes is bad. Rend your heart, not your garments. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. 3 motivations for people tearing their clothes. So number 1, it was extreme emotion, either anger or grief. People just extreme emotion and they tear their clothes. Number 2, it's an impulse. It happens in the moment. It happens so fast in the heat of the moment. And number 3, it was at times a public demonstration. So Joel has said, don't do these things. So I'm going to walk through these 3 things. Worship should be emotional, right? You should bring everything into it. But I'll give you a statement of warning today. If you require an emotional moment with God to define it as worship, you may be dangerously close to making an idol out of your worship. Mm. There's a church in England that had been going through a rough season, and the pastor had this feeling that their worship was just missing. It was missing the mark. It was off focus. It wasn't accomplishing what it was supposed to be doing. And so he came in and he took out all the sound system, and they dismantled the drums, and they had no instruments. And when people arrived for church, he said, "We're not doing any of that. We're just going to sing a cappella. No instruments. We're just going to sing to God." And they did this for weeks and months. And one of the fellows in that church was a guy by the name of Matt Redman. And he wrote a song about it. It starts out, "When the music fades and all is stripped away, and I simply come." And in the chorus he writes, "I'm coming back to the heart of worship because it's all about you." How many feel comfortable in a hand-raising church? How many? Let's see. How many don't feel comfortable in a hand-raising church? That's a Tim Hawkins joke. I know, I stole it. All right. But we will try and make an atmosphere where people can feel free to worship. When Joel says, "Rend your heart, not your garments," get to the heart of the matter. Right? I'm coming back to the heart of worship. I want to express emotion to God. It's an important lesson for us that as believers, we don't live a life of impulse. The world around us does, but we don't. We're called to live the life of commitment, not impulse. There are many people who choose Christ in an impulse, in an emotional moment, in a crisis moment, but they never grow roots. There's no commitment. It's not an impulse we're looking for. Don't tear your clothes in the moment. Let God tear your heart. We can put on our Sunday best, but our heart's not in it. And it rings empty. And in Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Brokenheartedness prepares me to receive God's work in my life, God's healing, God's miracle. As long as the heart is hard, it can grow towards arrogance and self-sufficiency. I've got it all together. I know what I'm doing. When it's broken, all those facades are crushed. That's why Joel says, rend your heart, not your garments. You can tear your garments on the outside and be unchanged on the inside, but when your heart is broken, you're ready to let God do what he wants to do inside. Right? So let's go back to 1874 and the great locust plague. Nobody thought that little critters would come back, but they did. And they destroyed everything in their path. There was a fellow came on the scene, his name was Charles Valentine Riley. And he says, I got the answer for you. And Charles came up with an idea. In the immortal words of Michael Jackson, just eat it. Charles came to find that with a little bit of butter, these little critters taste just a little bit nutty, but oh so filling. He found an answer, right? The disaster, the struggle, the heartache that's in your life, the thing you'd most want to get rid of, might in fact be the thing that nourishes you and brings you back to God and fills you with what he wants to do in your life. Because when we are broken, he shows himself strong.